The avoidant person is experiencing something they didn't anticipate and cannot easily manage. They're realizing who you actually are, what you've become, and what they actually lost. And this realization is creating genuine panic in their psychological system. When they pushed you away, when they created distance, when they ended things or withdrew into protective patterns, they operated with specific assumptions about you and about how the ending would unfold. They assumed you would wait for them, that you would remain stuck, pining and hoping for their return, that you would be diminished by their absence, that you would fit neatly into their narrative about relationships and about their own importance. They assumed they could keep you as an option they might return to if they changed their mind, that you would remain relatively unchanged and available in the background of their life while they explored their defended independence or pursued other connections that felt safer. But something has shifted that's forcing them to recognize these assumptions were completely wrong. You're not who they thought you were. You're not behaving according to their script. You've transformed in ways that reveal strength, self-worth, and forward movement that contradict everything they expected. You're not waiting. You're not broken. You're not diminished. You're not available as a backup option. You're actually thriving, growing, becoming more of who you're meant to be without them. And this reality is creating profound panic because it forces them to recognize several devastating truths simultaneously. They misjudged you and underestimated your strength. They lost someone far more valuable than they realized while they had you. Their patterns cost them something irreplaceable, and you might be genuinely gone in ways that cannot be reversed by their typical strategies of periodic reach-outs or expressions of renewed interest. The panic is not just about losing you. It's about the collapse of their entire framework for understanding the relationship and understanding themselves. It's about recognizing they were operating from a place of arrogance and delusion, believing they had more power and control than they actually had, believing you needed them more than they needed you, believing their withdrawal would hurt you more than it would hurt them. The realization of who you are now, someone who doesn't need them, who has moved beyond them, who is living well without them, is shattering these comfortable beliefs and forcing a confrontation with a reality they cannot escape or rationalize away. It is the realization that comes too late. You're not who they thought you were. The avoidant person's panic stems from the fundamental realization that their entire perception of who you were and who you are was inaccurate. And this misperception meant they made a catastrophic miscalculation in how they treated you and in their assumption that you would always be available if they decided they wanted you back. This realization is coming too late because you've already moved forward in ways that make their belated recognition irrelevant to your trajectory. But understanding what they're realizing and why it's creating panic illuminates both how profoundly they misjudge the situation and how complete their loss actually is. The avoidant person is realizing that you were never the needy, dependent, overly emotional person they framed you as during the relationship. They used your investment in the relationship, your expressions of care and need, your desire for closeness and commitment as evidence that you were too attached, too demanding, too unable to be complete without them. They saw your normal relationship needs and emotional expression as weaknesses that proved you weren't as strong or independent as they were. But now they're seeing evidence that contradicts this entire narrative. You're demonstrating independence they didn't think you possessed. You're showing emotional strength and resilience they didn't believe you had. You're living well without them in ways that prove you don't need them for your happiness or completeness. This realization forces them to recognize that their perception of you was distorted by their defensive framework, that they were judging your healthy attachment behaviors through their wounded lens, and that you were actually stronger and more complete all along than they gave you credit for. The avoidant person is realizing that your investment in the relationship wasn't neediness or weakness, but was strength and courage they lacked. You were willing to be vulnerable, to express your feelings and needs, to invest emotionally despite the risks, to stay and work through difficulties rather than running when things felt uncomfortable. All of these behaviors require enormous strength and emotional capacity that the avoidant person does not possess. They framed your vulnerability as weakness because they're too afraid to be vulnerable themselves. They framed your investment as neediness because they're too defended to invest fully in anything. But now they're recognizing that you are demonstrating emotional courage and capacity that they don't have. That your willingness to show up fully was strength rather than weakness, and that they were the limited one in the dynamic, not you. The avoidant person is realizing that you actually saw them clearly all along, that you understood their patterns and their wounds even while you were experiencing the pain those patterns caused. They might have assumed you didn't understand what was happening, that you were confused or taking their behavior personally without recognizing it as their own dysfunction. But evidence of your current clarity and growth reveals that you probably understood far more than you showed, that you were observing their patterns while trying to work with them, that you saw their wounds with compassion while also recognizing their responsibility for those wounds. This realization is uncomfortable because it means they weren't successfully hiding their patterns, weren't successfully maintaining their image, weren't successfully controlling the narrative the way they thought they were. You saw through them and you chose to engage anyway, and they threw away someone who understood them while still loving them. The avoidant person is realizing that your leaving or your acceptance of their withdrawal was not defeat, but was a choice based on self-respect and standards they should respect rather than dismiss. When you stopped pursuing them, when you accepted the ending, when you maintained no contact, they might have initially interpreted this as you giving up or as you not caring enough to fight for the relationship. But your subsequent growth and strength reveals that your departure was actually a conscious choice to no longer accept treatment that didn't align with your worth. That you left because you valued yourself enough to walk away from a situation that wasn't serving you, not because you were defeated or didn't care enough. This realization shifts their perception of the ending from something they controlled and decided to something you chose, taking power away from them and giving it to you. The avoidant person is realizing that you're not the same person you were when you were with them, that you've grown and evolved in ways that make you even more valuable and that make the loss even greater. Perhaps you've healed from the relationship and become more confident and self-assured. Perhaps you've achieved goals you were working toward. Perhaps you've developed new interests or deepened existing ones. Perhaps you're simply more at peace and more genuinely happy than you were when dealing with their inconsistency. Whatever the specific changes, they're witnessing a transformation that shows you're not stuck or diminished by the relationship's ending, but are actually flourishing without them. This transformation is threatening because it proves you didn't need them to be happy or complete, and it makes you even more attractive and desirable now than you were when they had access to you. The avoidant person is realizing that their assumptions about being able to return to you if they wanted were completely unfounded. They assumed you would be available, that you would accept them back if they reached out, but your current state reveals that this assumption was arrogant and incorrect. You've moved on, you've created a life without them, you've possibly even found someone else who can actually meet your needs. The door isn't just closed, it's locked and they don't have the key anymore. This realization creates panic because it means they've actually lost you in a permanent way rather than just creating temporary distance they could reverse whenever convenient. The avoidant person is realizing that you were better than anyone they're encountering now, that their comparisons of you to others reveal you possessed a rare combination of qualities they took for granted and that they're not finding elsewhere. They're dating or meeting other people and discovering that no one understands them like you did. No one is as compatible. No one offers the same depth or connection or patience. This progressive realization through comparison makes them recognize that you weren't just another person they dated, but were actually an exceptional match they destroyed through their patterns. The recognition that they had something rare and valuable and threw it away creates regret and panic that intensifies as they continue failing to find anyone who compares to you. how your transformation shattered their comfortable narrative. The avoidant person's panic is not just about recognizing who you actually are, but about how this recognition completely shatters the comfortable narrative they constructed about the relationship, the ending, and themselves. This narrative served important protective functions, allowing them to justify their behavior, to avoid guilt and responsibility, to maintain their self-image as the independent, rational person who made necessary choices. Your transformation destroys this narrative by providing evidence that contradicts its fundamental assumptions, forcing the avoidant person into an uncomfortable confrontation with a reality they can no longer deny or rationalize away. The comfortable narrative the avoidant person maintained was that you were too needy or too emotional or too demanding, and that the relationship ended because of your excessive needs or your inability to give them the space they required. This narrative made the ending your fault, or at least made it about incompatibility rather than about their avoidance and their patterns. But your current transformation reveals that you're not too needy or too emotional. You're independent and emotionally regulated and thriving. This evidence shatters the narrative that blamed you for the relationship's problems and forces the avoidant to recognize that the problem was their inability to handle normal intimacy, not your excessive demands or emotional instability. The comfortable narrative included the belief that they were the less invested party, the one with more power and control, the one who could take or leave the relationship while you desperately needed it. This belief protected their ego and made them feel superior and secure. But your transformation and your apparent ease in moving forward shatters this narrative by revealing that perhaps you weren't as invested or as dependent as they thought, or that you had the strength to divest and move forward in ways they didn't anticipate. Either interpretation is uncomfortable because both challenge their assumption that they had the power and that you needed them more than they needed you. The comfortable narrative included the assumption that their withdrawal hurt you more than it hurt them, that you were suffering while they were fine, that they were successfully moving on while you were stuck. This assumption allowed them to feel powerful and to avoid confronting their own pain and loss. But seeing you thriving, seeing you happy and growing and apparently unaffected by their absence, shatters this narrative by forcing them to recognize that maybe you're fine without them, maybe you're not suffering, maybe you've moved on successfully while they're the one who's stuck comparing everyone to you and unable to find what they lost. This reversal of who's more affected by the ending is deeply threatening to their ego and their sense of themselves. The comfortable narrative included the belief that they could maintain their defended independence and also keep you as an option they might explore if they ever felt ready or if they couldn't find something better. They assumed they could have it both ways, the freedom of being alone and the security of knowing you'd be available if they changed their mind. Your transformation shatters this narrative by proving they can't have both. That choosing their defended independence meant actually losing you, that you're not waiting as a backup option, that they made a real choice with real consequences rather than maintaining comfortable ambiguity. This realization that their choice was an actual choice with permanent loss attached creates panic because it means they're accountable for what they lost in ways they didn't anticipate. The comfortable narrative included the story they told themselves about who they are, an independent person who doesn't need intimate relationships, who is better off alone, who made a conscious choice to prioritize their individual development over a relationship. But your transformation challenges this narrative by highlighting through contrast that maybe they're not actually thriving in their independence. Maybe they're not better off alone. Maybe their choice wasn't a conscious preference, but fear-driven avoidance. If you're doing better without the relationship than you were in it, and if they're not doing better alone than they were with you, it suggests that the problem was their patterns preventing a healthy relationship rather than the relationship itself being inherently limiting or problematic. The comfortable narrative included the assumption that they were the mature, rational person making difficult but necessary decisions, while you were the emotional, reactive person unable to handle their need for space. But your calm, boundaried, dignified response to the ending and your subsequent growth shatters this narrative by revealing that you were actually the more mature and emotionally intelligent person all along. You handled the ending with grace. You respected their boundaries while maintaining your own. You moved forward with your life in healthy ways. Meanwhile, they're the one experiencing panic and regret and struggling to move on. This reversal forces them to question their entire self-perception and to recognize that their intellectual justifications for their patterns might have been sophisticated defenses rather than genuine wisdom. Your transformation also shatters their comfortable narrative about what you meant to them and how important the relationship was. They might have minimized the relationship's significance to protect themselves from the pain of loss, telling themselves it wasn't that serious, that you were together for a relatively short time, that you weren't that compatible anyway. But their current panic and their inability to stop thinking about you reveals that these minimizations were defensive lies. The relationship did matter. You did matter. The loss is significant. Your transformation forces this truth to the surface, because if you truly didn't matter, they wouldn't care how you're doing or wouldn't be affected by seeing you thriving. The panic when they see you're not waiting or broken. The avoidant person's panic reaches its peak when they fully recognize that you're not waiting for them and you're not broken by their absence. These two realizations combined create a psychological crisis because they violate the fundamental assumptions that allowed the avoidant person to maintain their defended position comfortably. Understanding what this panic feels like and what it's forcing them to confront illuminates both the depth of their miscalculation and the completeness of their loss. The realization that you're not waiting manifests through specific observations that the avoidant person makes or information they receive. Perhaps they see that you've removed or blocked them from social media, signaling you're not maintaining a connection or monitoring their life. Perhaps they hear through mutual friends that you're dating someone new or that you've expressed no interest in reconciliation. Perhaps they reach out in some small way and receive no response, or receive a response that's polite, but clearly boundaried and final. Perhaps they see you in person or in photos looking happy and engaged with your life in ways that don't include any space for them. All of these signals communicate clearly that you're not sitting around hoping they'll come back, that you're not organizing your life around the possibility of their return, that you've genuinely moved forward without them. This realization that you're not waiting creates panic because it removes the safety net the avoidant person didn't realize they were depending on. They assumed that their withdrawal was reversible, that they could come back whenever they wanted and you would be receptive. This assumption allowed them to explore their defended independence without truly facing the permanence of loss, because in the back of their mind, you were still there as an option. But discovering you're not waiting means the choice they made actually had permanent consequences, that the door has closed, that they can't reverse course simply by deciding they want to. This permanence of loss is terrifying because it means they're accountable for what they've lost in ways they didn't fully accept before. The realization that you're not broken by their absence is equally threatening and comes through observing that you're actually thriving rather than suffering. The avoidant person might have assumed that their absence would devastate you, that you would struggle significantly, that you would be obviously hurt and diminished. This assumption served their ego and also justified their withdrawal by making it seem like the kind thing to do was to stay away and let you heal. But seeing that you're not broken, that you're actually doing well, or even better than when you were dealing with their patterns, completely contradicts this assumption. You're not devastated. You're not struggling. You're not obviously hurt. You're happy, confident, engaged with your life, possibly more vibrant and alive than you were when caught in the anxiety of their hot and cold behavior. This realization that you're not broken creates panic because it means the avoidant person didn't have the impact they assumed they had, that they're not as important or as powerful as they believed, that you're stronger and more resilient than they gave you credit for. Their ego is threatened by discovering that you didn't need them to be happy, that you're fine without them, that their presence or absence isn't the defining factor in your well-being that they assumed it was. This ego blow combines with the recognition that if you're fine without them, maybe you were never as dependent or invested as they believed, which further threatens their sense of their own importance and desirability. The combination of you not waiting and you not being broken creates particularly acute panic because it means the avoidant person has actually lost you in a permanent way while you're simultaneously demonstrating that you're better off without them. This is a worst-case scenario for their ego. They lost something valuable that they now cannot get back, and the person they lost is thriving without them in ways that suggest they were actually the problem, or at least that their absence is not the loss they assumed it would be for you. The panic manifests as obsessive thinking about you, as attempts to reach out or to get information about you, as expressions of regret or renewed interest that they wouldn't have expressed when they still had access to you. The panic also includes the avoidant person recognizing that time is working against them rather than for them. While they were assuming you'd be waiting, time was actually moving you further away from them. You were healing, growing, potentially meeting other people, definitely creating a life without them in it. Every day that passed made you less available and less likely to want to return to them. This recognition that time has been eroding their position rather than preserving it creates urgency and panic because it means that even if they've realized their mistake, they might be too late to do anything about it, that the opportunity to have you has passed while they were busy protecting themselves from the intimacy you were offering. The avoidant person's panic includes recognition that your lack of waiting and your thriving are connected. You're doing well precisely because you're not waiting for them, because you redirected the energy you were investing in the relationship toward your own life and growth, because you stopped tolerating their patterns and started honoring your own worth. This connection means that any return to them would likely require you to stop doing well, to stop thriving, to go back to the anxiety and pain that characterized being with them. The avoidant person might recognize this on some level and realize that asking you to come back is asking you to sacrifice your well-being for their comfort, which makes the request feel impossible even as they desperately want to make it. Why their panic changes nothing about what you should do. The avoidant person's panic, their belated realization of who you are and what they lost, their recognition that you're not waiting and not broken, all of this creates a dramatic shift in their internal experience and might lead to attempts to reach out or to express renewed interest or to communicate their regret. But as significant as their panic might be to them, it changes nothing about what you should do or about whether reconnection would be wise. Understanding why their panic is irrelevant to your decisions protects you from being pulled back into dynamics that hurt you and from sacrificing your growth for their comfort. The first reason their panic changes nothing is that panic is not the same as capacity. The avoidant person might be panicking about losing you, might desperately want you back, might recognize they made a terrible mistake. But these feelings and recognitions don't mean they've developed the capacity to actually show up differently in a relationship with you. Capacity requires sustained work to address attachment wounds, to develop the ability to tolerate intimacy without fleeing, to practice vulnerability and emotional presence consistently. Panic is an emotional response to loss. It's not therapeutic work. It's not changed attachment patterns. The same person who panicked about losing you is the same person who pushed you away when you were available. The panic doesn't change their fundamental capacity or their defensive patterns. The second reason their panic is irrelevant is that it's motivated by loss and scarcity rather than by a genuine readiness for the intimacy a relationship requires. The avoidant person wants you more now that you're unavailable because unavailability reduces the threat of actual intimacy. They can pine for you and panic about losing you without having to actually be vulnerable or to sustain emotional presence with you. If you became available again, if you took them back, their panic would likely subside and their typical patterns would reassert themselves. The anxiety about losing you would be replaced by the anxiety about being too close to you, and the push-pull dynamic would resume. Their panic is about the fear of permanent loss, not about a genuine desire to do the uncomfortable work that being with you would require. The third reason their panic changes nothing is that responding to their panic by making yourself available again would teach them that their patterns have no lasting consequences, that they can push you away and pull you back repeatedly without having to change. If you return because they're panicking, you confirm that their withdrawal is reversible, that you'll always be available when they want you, that they don't have to respect your boundaries or meet your needs because you'll accept them back regardless. This lesson ensures they'll repeat the pattern because they've learned it works. They can have the relief of distance when intimacy feels threatening, and they can have you back when the distance becomes uncomfortable. The only way they might develop motivation to actually change is by experiencing real consequences for their patterns. And your continued absence is one of the only consequences that might create sufficient discomfort to motivate the difficult work of change.